Listen, if you're still looking down on copycats, you are absolutely missing out on the next massive business opportunity. Seriously, we've all been conditioned to believe that imitation is a dirty word, right? Like it's a sign of weakness or a lack of creativity. But what if I told you that the companies we revere as absolute visionaries, the ones changing the world, actually built their empires by being world-class imitators? Today in this explainer, we are completely dismantling everything you thought you knew about originality. Just think about Sam Walton for a second, the legendary founder of Walmart. He literally went on record and outright admitted that the core of his groundbreaking retail success was, well, copying. It creates a bit of cognitive dissonance in your head, doesn't it? Our most revered business leaders are, in fact, master imitators. And honestly, history shows us over and over again that from Mozart to Picasso, greatness almost always begins with a template. So here's the absolute crucial point we need to address. If the titans of industry see imitation as a vital strategic necessity, why do we treat it as a moral failure? Today, we're going to dive deep into the actual science and strategy behind imitation in business warfare. We're going to explore how simple copycats evolve into absolute category kings, and more importantly, how you can take this exact methodology and apply it to your own business or career. Let's get into it. Chapter 1. Greatness often begins with copied well. Okay, so when Toyota wanted to revolutionize automobile manufacturing, you'd think they would just look at Ford, right? Wrong. Ford's assembly line was what we call a push system. Parts were just continuously pushed onto the line, literally forcing production forward. Now, that was great for mass-producing identical cars, but it was absolutely terrible if you wanted to make small batches of different vehicles. Instead, Toyota's Taiichi Ono looked at something entirely different. He looked at the American supermarket. He noticed that in a supermarket, a customer pulls exactly what they need, exactly when they need it, and the store only restocks the exact items that were taken. Ono essentially copied this retail structure, applied it directly to car manufacturing, and boom, he created the world-famous just-in-time production system, a real game changer. And this brilliantly illustrates a concept called the distant world. Toyota looked far outside their own industry. They looked at supermarkets. Similarly, when Ito Yokado wanted to revolutionize Japanese retail, they didn't just stare at domestic stores. No, they looked all the way across the ocean at the American Southland Corporation, which happens to be the parent company of 7-Eleven. The takeaway here? Finding the perfect model to copy usually means looking exactly where your direct competitors aren't looking, which brings us to the absolutely wild story of 7-Eleven Japan. These guys perfectly executed a structural copy. They took the US 7-Eleven trademark, they grabbed the percentage-based royalty franchise model, and they planted it in Japan. But they didn't just stop there. They knew that selling American burgers and sandwiches just wasn't gonna fly in 1970s Japan. So they localized the details aggressively. They swapped out the burgers for rice balls, steamed buns, and sushi. They also innovated this revolutionary joint delivery system, so these tiny stores could receive thousands of items without being completely overwhelmed by dozens of different delivery trucks every single day. They copied the skeleton, sure, but they built a completely new, locally adapted body around it. And here's the crazy part, 7-Eleven Japan became such an unstoppable juggernaut that they eventually bought out their struggling American parent company. Talk about the student becoming the master. Chapter 2. The 3-step methodology of imitation. So how do you actually do this? Well, it's based on an ancient Zen concept used in Japanese martial arts and tea ceremonies known as shuhari. Let's break it down. Step 1 is keep. You absolutely must faithfully and completely copy the structural foundation of your master. Don't try to get clever and change things yet. You have to truly understand why the original works first. Then, step 2 is break. This is where you adapt the rules to your specific environment, just like 7-Eleven did with the rice balls. And finally, step 3 is distance. Here, your adaptations have compounded so much that you transcend the original model entirely. You've become something the world has quite literally never seen before. We call this compound eye imitation, because you see, true innovation doesn't just come from staring at a model teacher. That's only half the puzzle. You also desperately need a negative teacher. You need a clear example of exactly what not to do. It's that tension, that friction between the two that creates a real breakthrough. Let's look at a classic example, Howard Schultz and Starbucks. So Schultz goes to Italy, right? And he finds his model teacher, the Italian espresso bar. His initial keep phase was super rigid. He brought back standing-only bars, baristas wearing bow ties, and menus written entirely in Italian. But his American customers absolutely hated it. They complained about the loud opera music, they wanted a place to sit down, and they couldn't even read the menu. So he had to pivot to the break phase.
He kept the core coffee culture, but he added comfortable chairs, translated the menus into English, and ditched the formal bow ties. He resolved the contradiction between the European model and American consumer habits, and in doing so, he created a multi-billion-dollar empire.
Meanwhile, over in Japan, Doutor Coffee was doing the exact same thing, but they leaned heavily into the negative teacher concept. Their founder looked at Parisian standing cafes and thought, okay, there's my model teacher. But his negative teacher? That was the existing Japanese cafe market, which had become decadent, incredibly overpriced, and super alienating for the average person. He literally looked at the industry and said, if this continues, Japan's cafe culture is finished. By keeping that negative teacher squarely in his sights, he reverse-engineered a low-price, high-volume, self-service model that completely disrupted the entire Japanese market. So remember, knowing what to run away from is just as powerful as knowing what to run toward.
Chapter 3. Reverse Thinking, Defeating Industry Giants. If you want to do this mechanically, you need to use the PVAR framework. It basically deconstructs any business into 4 core pillars. You've got positioning, which is who they're targeting, value, what they're actually offering, activities, how they physically deliver it, and resources, the underlying tech or assets they own. Now, here is the secret. If you want to defeat an entrenched giant, you do not just copy their PVAR, you reverse it entirely. This is exactly how Canon took down Xerox. Back in the day, Xerox was the absolute, undisputed king of copiers. Canon knew for a fact they couldn't beat them at their own game, so they flipped the script. Xerox positioned itself for massive corporations. Canon targeted individuals and small businesses. Xerox offered high-cost leased machines. Canon sold low-priced, accessible mini-copiers. Xerox relied on this massive direct sales and maintenance army. Canon delegated their sales and aimed for a zero-maintenance machine. Canon did the literal opposite of the industry leader in every single category. It's a textbook David and Goliath story. But wait, here is the real genius twist. To actually make a zero-maintenance copier, Canon had to completely eliminate the need for Xerox's massive service network. But how on earth do you do that? Well, they looked at a completely different industry. They literally copied the throwaway logic of an aluminum beer can. Yeah, you heard that right. Canon's engineers took all the complex, breakable parts of a copier, the drum, the toner, the developer, and packed them into one disposable aluminum cartridge. When it ran out or broke, you didn't call a repairman, you just threw it away and popped in a new one. By copying a simple beer can, Canon structurally destroyed Xerox's greatest competitive advantage overnight. Chapter 4. The Methodology of Scientific Imitation. So tying this all together, the absolutely crucial point is understanding why you are copying in the first place. If you're just copying to deal with an immediate threat, that just leads to fast following. It's homogenization. Everyone ends up making the exact same, slightly tweaked product. It's purely defensive. But copying for true innovation, that requires you to look at the product, the service, and the underlying business model, using either forward imitation, pulling ideas from distant industries, or reverse imitation, doing the exact opposite of your current competitors. If you want to add this to your strategic arsenal today, right now, just follow these 3 rules. Rule number 1, stop obsessing over your direct peers and start observing massive cross-industry trends. Rule number 2, when you do find a model to copy, you have to dive deep. Don't just copy the surface-level aesthetic. You need to extract the underlying structural DNA of why it actually makes money. And rule number 3, build a mental library of cross-industry models. The more business models you study, from, say, Indian street vendors all the way to low-cost airlines, the faster you'll be able to synthesize a groundbreaking idea in your own field. I want to leave you with this really profound thought from the French writer Chateaubriand. He said, "The original writer is not one who does not imitate others, but one who cannot be imitated." Think about that for a second. True originality isn't about conjuring something out of thin air. It's about combining and adapting existing models so brilliantly, so seamlessly, that you create a system so incredibly unique, nobody else can even figure out how to copy you. So my final question to you is this. The next time you see a copycat product out in the wild, are you going to rush to mock it? Or will you take a step back, look at the underlying structure, and ask yourself what brilliant piece of business logic they might be reverse engineering? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Let me know in the comments if you've ever experienced a product that started as an absolute copy, but eventually totally outshined the original. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep looking for those distant models.